Story number 1. Echoes of Amityville. I never believed in ghosts. To me, the stories of haunted houses and restless spirits were nothing more than urban legends, exaggerated tales told around campfires and late-night gatherings. But nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The house stood silently on the corner of the street, its once vibrant facade now dulled by years of neglect. Tall oak trees loomed over the property, their branches swaying gently in the autumn breeze. When I first saw the house, it looked picturesque, the perfect blend of charm and history. But as I approached, an unsettling feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I had moved into Amityville seeking a fresh start, hoping the quiet suburb would offer the peace I desperately needed after a tumultuous divorce. The previous owners, the Lutz family, had left under mysterious circumstances, their abrupt departure leaving behind unanswered questions and a lingering aura of despair. Despite the whispers from neighbors and the occasional cold shoulder, I decided to make the house my own. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking, painting walls, and restoring the garden. The neighborhood was friendly enough, and the tranquility I sought seemed within reach. But as the days turned into weeks, strange occurrences began to disrupt my newfound peace. It started subtly. At night, I would hear faint footsteps echoing through the halls, footsteps that seemed too deliberate to be my own. At first, I dismissed them as the house settling or the pipes expanding in the cold. But the sounds persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadowy figures darting just beyond the reach of my flashlight. One stormy evening, as rain pounded against the windows and lightning illuminated the darkened rooms, I found myself unable to sleep. The house was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of the storm muffled by thick curtains. I decided to investigate, flashlight in hand, hoping to quell my growing unease. As I wandered through the dimly lit hallways, the temperature seemed to drop sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air. The footsteps resumed, louder this time, leading me toward the attic. I hesitated, my heart racing, but something compelled me to follow the sound. The attic door creaked open with a force that jolted me upright. The room was cluttered with old furniture and dusty memorabilia, remnants of a life long forgotten. In the center stood a grand piano, its keys yellowed and chipped. As I approached, the air thickened, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Suddenly, a soft melody filled the room, the piano playing itself without any visible hands. The music was hauntingly beautiful, yet laced with an undercurrent of sorrow and anger. I reached out, trying to touch the instrument, but my hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The room darkened, and the shadows deepened, swirling around me like living entities. A voice whispered from the darkness, barely audible over the piano's lament. "Leave this place," it urged, filled with a desperation that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering as the shadows coalesced into a figure, a man, tall and imposing, his face obscured by darkness. "You don't belong here," he intoned, his voice echoing through the attic. "This house holds our pain." I tried to speak, to ask who he was and what he wanted, but my throat was paralyzed by fear. The figure moved closer, and I could feel his presence pressing down on me, a weight of sorrow and malice intertwined. "You must go," he repeated, his voice growing louder, more insistent. "Leave now, before it's too late." Desperate to escape, I turned and fled the attic, the door slamming shut behind me with a thunderous bang. The footsteps and whispers followed, echoing through the house as I raced back to my bedroom. I barricaded the door, my mind racing with thoughts of leaving this place behind. But as I looked around, I realized the house had changed. Rooms shifted and twisted, hallways elongating and doors appearing where none had been before. Days turned into nights, and the hauntings intensified. The crying of unseen children echoed through the walls, their voices filled with anguish. Cold spots appeared without warning, and the foul stench of decay permeated the air, making it difficult to breathe. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the feeling of being watched was ever present. I reached out to neighbors, hoping someone could shed light on the house's dark history. They told me of the DeFeo murders, of the Lutz family's terrifying experiences, and of the restless spirits that never found peace. Each story deepened my fear, confirming that the legends were more than mere folklore. One night, determined to confront the spirits and understand their pain, I decided to hold a seance in the attic. I arranged a circle of candles around the piano, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Holding my breath, I began to call out to the spirits, hoping to communicate and find a way to help them move on. The air grew thick with tension as the candles burned lower, their light wavering. The piano began to play once more, the melody more frantic and chaotic. The figure of the faceless man appeared again, his presence overwhelming. "Why do you disturb us?" he demanded, his voice echoing with both sorrow and rage. "I want to help," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I want you to find peace." The room trembled, and the shadows swirled around me, responding to my plea. The faceless man extended his hand, and for a moment I felt a connection, a surge of emotion that conveyed their suffering and longing. "Remember our stories," he implored. "Honor our memories, and we will find peace." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded, understanding the depth of their pain. "I will remember," I vowed. "I will share your stories so you are never forgotten." The atmosphere shifted, the oppressive weight lifting as the shadows began to dissipate. The piano's melody softened, becoming a gentle lullaby that filled the room with a sense of calm. The faceless man and the other spirits faded into the light, their presence replaced by a peaceful silence. Exhausted but relieved, I left the attic, feeling a profound sense of closure. The house seemed less menacing now, the dark energy dissipated by our shared understanding. I packed my belongings and left Amityville, the memory of those haunting nights etched into my soul. Years later, I still think about the treehouse and the spirits I encountered there. Their stories linger in my mind, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the next. The experience taught me that some places hold memories too powerful to be forgotten, and that honoring those memories is the key to finding peace for both the living and the dead. And sometimes, on stormy nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the rain lashes against my windows, I can still hear the faint melody of the piano and the soft whispers of the spirits, reminding me of the house that never truly let them go. Story number 2. Whispers of Whaley House. San Diego's skyline sparkled under the Californian sun, but nestled in the heart of Old Town, the Whaley House stood as a silent sentinel to a bygone era. To the untrained eye, it was just another historic building, its Victorian architecture meticulously preserved. But to those who knew its history, it was the most haunted house in America, a place where the past refused to stay buried. My name is Daniel Green, and my fascination with haunted places brought me to Whaley House one crisp October evening. As a writer, I sought stories that delved beneath the surface, tales that intertwined history with the supernatural. The Whaley House, with its dark legacy and countless reported hauntings, was the perfect subject for my next book. The air was thick with anticipation as I approached the house. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the structure bathed in the eerie glow of the moonlight. The ornate wooden facade, adorned with intricate carvings and tall, narrow windows, seemed almost alive in the shadows. Locals spoke of restless spirits, the ghost of a hanged man, the cries of children, and the phantom melodies of a self-playing piano that echoed through the night. I had arranged to stay overnight, determined to experience the hauntings firsthand. Armed with my camera, a voice recorder, and a notebook, I stepped through the heavy wooden doors. The interior was a blend of elegance and decay, the once grand furnishings now draped in dust and cobwebs. The grand staircase loomed ahead, its banister intricately carved but worn by time. As I settled into the guest room, the whispers of history surrounded me. I unpacked my equipment, setting up my camera in the center of the room. The clock ticked loudly, each second amplifying the silence that enveloped the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that eyes were watching my every move. Night descended swiftly, bringing with it a storm that raged outside. Thunder roared and lightning illuminated the darkened windows, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the walls. I sat by the window, watching the tempest unfold, when I first heard it, a soft, melancholic melody emanating from the parlor. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed my flashlight and made my way through the dimly lit corridors. The music grew louder as I approached the parlor, where the infamous self-playing piano stood. The room was bathed in a ghostly light, the piano keys moving on their own, producing a haunting tune that sent shivers down my spine. As I watched, entranced by the spectral performance, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath became visible in the frigid air, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, reaching out toward me like dark tendrils. The melody shifted, becoming discordant and unsettling, as if the spirits within the house were trying to communicate. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the room fell silent. I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath against my neck. Turning slowly, I faced the source of the chill. An apparition of a man, his face obscured by shadows, stood at the far end of the room. His eyes, though hidden, seemed to pierce through me, filled with sorrow and anger. "Leave this place," he whispered, his voice echoing through the parlor. "Don't let our stories be forgotten." I froze, my heart racing as I tried to comprehend the message. The air grew heavier, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on me. Gathering my courage, I spoke softly, "I'm here to remember your stories, to honor your memories." The apparition nodded slowly, his form beginning to fade. The temperature rose slightly, and the oppressive feeling lifted as the spirit departed. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, feeling a mix of relief and determination. I knew then that my purpose was clear, to uncover the truth behind Whaley House and give voice to the souls that lingered within its walls. The night wore on, and the house seemed to settle into a restless slumber. Around midnight, the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my voice recorder, recording every sound in the hopes of capturing evidence of the supernatural. The footsteps approached my room, stopping just outside the door. The doorknob twisted slowly, and a faint whisper seeped through the gap. "Remember us." I leaned closer, trying to catch the words, but they dissolved into the night. The door swung open, and a gust of cold air swept into the room, extinguishing my candles. My flashlight flickered on, casting long shadows across the room. In the beam of light, I saw the faint outline of a child, her eyes hollow and filled with despair. She reached out a hand, her fingers grazing the edge of my desk before dissipating into the darkness. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized the depth of their suffering. The house was a vessel of their pain, each room holding echoes of the tragedies that had unfolded within its walls. Determined to uncover their stories, I spent the next day delving into the history of Whaley House, interviewing locals and poring over old newspaper articles. I learned of the DeFeo murders, where the entire DeFeo family was brutally slain in the house, the killer never apprehended. Then came the Lutz family, who moved into the house only to flee after 28 days, claiming they were tormented by malevolent spirits. The tales were consistent: phantom apparitions, unexplained noises, and an overwhelming sense of dread that made living there unbearable. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the house with renewed purpose. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the trees, I prepared to spend another night, determined to document the remaining hauntings. The house greeted me with an unsettling calm, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. Around midnight, the familiar melody of the self-playing piano began once more, but this time, it was accompanied by the sound of children laughing, joyous yet hollow. The shadows in the room deepened, and the symbols on the walls began to glow with an unearthly light. I felt a presence behind me, and turning slowly, I saw the faceless man standing at the foot of the stairs, his form more defined yet still shrouded in darkness. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his voice a blend of sorrow and menace. "I'm here to tell your stories," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear gripping me. "To honor your memories and help you find peace." The air grew thick with emotion as the spirits around me seemed to respond to my words. The crying, the whispers, the apparitions, they were all part of a collective plea for recognition and remembrance. I began to speak, recounting the stories I had uncovered, my voice echoing through the haunted halls. As I spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and gratitude. The spirits began to fade, their forms softening as they found solace in my acknowledgement. The faceless man nodded solemnly before dissolving into the light, leaving me alone in the now peaceful parlor. Exhausted but fulfilled, I left Whaley House with a profound sense of connection to its past. The hauntings had ceased, replaced by a serene silence that spoke of closure and release. My experience became the cornerstone of my book, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits of the past. Years later, Whaley House still stands, its haunted legacy intact. Visitors who dare to enter often report similar experiences, feeling watched, hearing faint cries, and seeing ghostly figures in the windows. But thanks to my efforts, the stories of the DeFeo and Lutz families are no longer forgotten. Their voices resonate through the house, ensuring that their memories live on, forever entwined with the history and mystery of the most haunted house in America. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I hear the faint echoes of their voices, a haunting reminder that some stories are never truly over, they linger, waiting to be remembered and honored. Story number 3. Whispers of Villisca. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the small town of Villisca, Iowa. The air was thick with humidity, a remnant of the day's lingering summer heat. My name is Nathaniel Hayes, and I've always been fascinated by places steeped in darkness and mystery. The Villisca axe murder house was the kind of place that called to my curiosity, a house with a gruesome past and an even more haunting present. I arrived in Villisca on a warm August evening, the town eerily quiet, save for the occasional chirp of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The house itself stood at the end of a narrow, tree-lined street, its Victorian architecture both beautiful and foreboding. White paint chipped and faded, ornate trim worn by years of neglect. The once vibrant gardens were overgrown, nature reclaiming what man had abandoned. As I approached the front door, a sense of unease settled over me. The stories I'd read couldn't fully prepare me for the palpable tension that seemed to emanate from the house. Locals gave me wary glances, their eyes darting away when I tried to engage them. It was clear that the house wasn't just another old building, it was a scar on the town's history. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, its hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dark, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. Moonlight streamed through the dusty windows, casting ghostly patterns on the worn wooden floors. I set up my equipment in what was once the living room, the center of the house's tragic story. In 1912, the Villisca axe murder house became the scene of one of America's most infamous unsolved murders. Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 overnight guests were brutally slain by an unknown assailant wielding an axe. The brutality of the crime left the town in shock, the mystery of the murderer's identity lingering for over a century. Many believed that the restless spirits of the victims still haunt the house, their anguish echoing through its halls. As midnight approached, the temperature in the house began to drop, a chill that seeped into my bones despite the humid summer air outside. I sat in the living room, notebook in hand, recounting the events of that fateful night. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky roof and the distant rumble of thunder. A storm was brewing outside. Around 2 a.m., the first whispers began. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but growing louder and more distinct. "Help us," the voice was barely audible, but it sent shivers down my spine. I looked around, trying to locate the source, but saw nothing, just the empty room and the shadows dancing on the walls. I decided to follow the sound, flashlight in hand, making my way through the narrow hallways. Each step felt heavier, the house seeming to resist my presence. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by faint footsteps echoing down the corridor. My heart pounded as I reached the staircase leading to the upstairs bedrooms, the scene of the massacre. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step amplifying the tension. At the top, I paused, listening to the sounds that seemed to emanate from every direction. The air was thick with sorrow and fear, as if the very walls held the memories of that night. I moved cautiously toward the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore had met their gruesome fate. As I entered the room, the temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the icy air. The bed was still, the sheets rumpled as if someone had recently left in a hurry. My flashlight beam landed on the window, where I saw a faint, glowing figure standing just outside. It was a shadowy form, indistinct and ethereal, but unmistakably human. My pulse quickened as I realized I wasn't alone. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a spectral wind. "Remember us. Don't forget," the voice was desperate, filled with a longing for recognition and peace. I reached out, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing. The figure outside the window began to move, its form shifting and fading like mist in the morning sun. Suddenly, the room was filled with the sound of a piano playing, a haunting, sorrowful melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The music swelled, filling the space with its melancholic tune. I felt a presence behind me, a cold hand gripping my shoulder. I spun around, flashlight darting through the darkness, but there was nothing, only the lingering echo of the music. Determined to document everything, I continued my exploration, moving from room to room. In each space, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of tragedy. Children's toys lay scattered on the floor, their innocence tainted by the violence that had unfolded. The dining room table was set as if awaiting a meal that would never come, the silverware tarnished and abandoned. As I entered the basement, the whispers became almost tangible, the voices intertwining into a cacophony of pain and loss. The basement was colder still, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and something more sinister. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls adorned with cryptic symbols and faded photographs. One image caught my eye, a family portrait, the faces scratched out and obscured, leaving only the outline of their figures. The whispers grew louder, now chanting in unison, "Let us go. Free us." The ground beneath me seemed to tremble, the walls closing in as if the house itself was reacting to the emotional turmoil within. I felt a presence pressing down on me, the invisible weight of countless souls yearning for release. Panic surged through me as the whispers turned to screams, the sound echoing through the basement like a chorus of tortured spirits. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet. The basement lights flickered, and the temperature dropped to unbearable levels. Shadows coalesced into twisted forms, their outlines blurred and shifting like smoke. I could feel their anger, their pain, a palpable force that threatened to overwhelm me. Desperate, I grabbed my camera, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural activity. As I pointed the lens around the room, the camera flickered to life, recording the chaos around me. The shadows moved with a life of their own, reaching out as if to grasp me, their forms becoming more defined and menacing. One shadowy figure stepped forward, its presence commanding and terrifying. I could feel its eyes boring into me, the intensity of its gaze freezing me in place. "Why do you intrude upon our sorrow?" it demanded, its voice a deep, resonant growl that echoed through the basement. "I'm here to remember your stories," I replied, my voice trembling but resolute. "To honor your memories and help you find peace." The figure paused, the shadows swirling around it in a violent dance. "Remember us, but respect our pain," it intoned. "Only then can we move on." With that, the atmosphere began to shift. The oppressive weight lifted, the shadows dissipating into the air like morning mist. The whispers softened, turning into a gentle lullaby that filled the basement with a sense of calm. The temperature rose, the basement warming as the presence of the spirits began to fade. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the echoes of the night's horrors lingering in my mind. The basement door creaked open, allowing me to escape the haunted confines of the Villisca axe murder house. As I made my way back upstairs, the house seemed to settle into a peaceful silence, the spirits finally finding the closure they had long sought. Driving away from Villisca, the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the town that had held its dark secrets for over a century. The experience had left me shaken, yet determined to share the stories of those who had been lost to the shadows. The Villisca axe murder house stood as a testament to the enduring power of memory and the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits of the past. Years later, the house remains a symbol of tragedy and mystery, drawing those who seek to understand the supernatural and the human capacity for both cruelty and redemption. Visitors still report hearing whispers and seeing fleeting shadows, a reminder that some stories never truly end, they linger, echoing through time, waiting to be remembered and honored. And sometimes, on stormy nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the rain lashes against the windows, I can still hear the faint cries of the lost souls, their voices a haunting melody that underscores the enduring legacy of the most haunted house in America. Story number 4. Echoes of the Bell Witch. The sun had long set behind the dense woods of Robertson County, Tennessee, casting the Bell Witch house into a cloak of darkness that seemed almost impenetrable. My name is Jake Thompson, and I've always been drawn to places where history and the supernatural intersect. The legend of the Bell Witch, a malevolent spirit that tormented the Bell family in the early 19th century, had fascinated me for years. Determined to uncover the truth behind the tales, I found myself standing before the weathered facade of the infamous house one chilly October evening. The house itself was a relic of a bygone era, its once vibrant paint now chipped and faded by relentless seasons. Tall oak trees encircled the property, their branches entwining like skeletal fingers reaching out to the night sky. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a reminder of the house's long abandonment. Locals avoided the area, their wary glances and hushed warnings only fueling my resolve to explore the mysteries within. As I approached the front door, an uneasy silence settled over the landscape. The only sound was the rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, carrying with it an ominous sense of foreboding. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead, and pushed open the heavy wooden door. It creaked loudly, echoing through the empty rooms like a mournful wail. Inside, the house was cloaked in shadows, the moonlight filtering through cracked windows casting ghostly patterns on the floor. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I stepped cautiously forward, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of grime that covered the wooden floors. The air was cold, sending shivers down my spine despite the warmth of my jacket. I set up my camera and voice recorder in what appeared to be the main living area, the heart of the house's dark history. The first few hours were uneventful, filled with meticulous exploration and documentation. I examined old furniture draped in white sheets, their shapes distorted by years of neglect. Portraits hung crooked on the walls, their subjects staring blankly into the void, their eyes seeming to follow my every move. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, an invisible presence lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. As midnight approached, the house seemed to come alive with a sinister energy. The temperature dropped sharply, and my breath became visible in the frigid air. It was then that I heard the first sound, a faint knocking coming from the upper floor. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the sound growing louder and more insistent. It echoed through the halls, a relentless rhythm that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way toward the staircase, each step creaking under my weight. The knocking seemed to emanate from the second floor, a place where no one had set foot for over a century. As I ascended the stairs, the air grew colder, the oppressive silence broken only by the persistent knocking. I reached the top, the hallway stretching out before me like a dark corridor leading to the unknown. The knocking abruptly stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I reached for the door at the end of the hall. Pushing it open, I entered what appeared to be a former bedroom, the bed still made with a threadbare quilt. The room was cold, the windows tightly shut to keep out the storm raging outside. I set up my equipment in the corner, hoping to capture any supernatural activity. Minutes passed in tense anticipation, the silence thick and heavy. Then, without warning, the room was filled with the sound of children's laughter, joyous yet hollow, echoing through the space like a ghostly refrain. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the room, but saw nothing. The laughter faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me alone once more with my racing heart. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted further, and a foul odor of decay filled the air. My camera flickered, capturing a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. It was indistinct, a vague silhouette with no discernible features, yet its presence was undeniably malevolent. The figure began to move, slowly gliding across the room toward me, the air growing colder with each passing second. I backed away, my mind racing with fear and disbelief. The figure reached out a hand, and I felt a forceful push that sent me stumbling into the bed. Pain shot through my body as I fell onto the threadbare mattress, the world spinning around me. Desperate to escape, I struggled to my feet, only to be met with the sound of a heavy object crashing to the floor behind me. Turning, I saw the ghostly image of a man, Josiah Bell himself, his face twisted in rage, his eyes empty voids that seemed to pierce through my very soul. He raised an axe, the weapon glinting ominously in the moonlight, and advanced toward me with a determined, murderous intent. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move, paralyzed by fear. Just as Josiah was about to strike, the house seemed to convulse, the walls bending and warping as if under some invisible force. The temperature surged, the oppressive cold replaced by a blistering heat that made it difficult to breathe. The ghostly figure of Josiah faltered, his form flickering and wavering as the energy within the house shifted. A sudden crash echoed through the house as the main floor seemed to collapse inward, forcing me to retreat. I sprinted down the stairs, the sounds of chaos and supernatural fury following me every step of the way. As I reached the front door, it slammed shut violently, blocking my escape. The house groaned and moaned, the spirits within unleashed in their wrath. Panicked, I turned back to find another way out, my mind racing to find a solution. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, echoing through the halls like a chorus of tormented souls. Remember us. Honor our stories. The voices were filled with sorrow and anger, their pleas intertwining with the chaos of the haunted house. In a moment of clarity, I remembered the legends about the Bell Witch, how their torment was tied to unspoken stories and unresolved pain. Determined to appease the spirits, I began to speak aloud, recounting the history I had uncovered, acknowledging their suffering and promising to remember their stories. My voice wavered, but the words carried a genuine intent that seemed to resonate with the restless spirits. The house began to calm, the oppressive energy lifting as the spirits responded to my plea. The whispers softened, turning into a gentle hum that filled the air with a sense of peace. The ghostly figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into the ether as the house returned to a state of eerie stillness. The temperature normalized, and the foul odor dissipated, replaced by a calm silence that felt like a sigh of relief. Exhausted but resolute, I left the tree house, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds and illuminating the property with a soft, golden hue. As I drove away, the house stood silent and still, its dark history finally finding a semblance of closure. The legends of the Bell Witch had been given voice, their stories remembered and honored, allowing their spirits to finally rest. Back home, I pored over my notes and recordings, compiling the experiences into a narrative that honored the lives and suffering of those who had been tormented by the Bell Witch. The story of the haunted treehouse spread, resonating with others who had encountered unexplained phenomena and restless spirits. It became a testament to the power of memory and the importance of giving voice to the voiceless, ensuring that the echoes of the past would never be forgotten. Years later, I still think about that night in Villisca. The fear, the sorrow, and the eventual peace left a lasting imprint on my soul. The Bell Witch House remains a place of both dread and reverence, a symbol of the thin veil between our world and the next. And sometimes, when the night is still and the wind whispers through the trees, I can hear the faint echoes of those restless spirits, a haunting reminder of the stories that lie just beyond our understanding, waiting to be remembered and honored. Story number 5. Shadows of the Winchester House. San Jose's skyline glittered under the California sun, but nestled amidst the bustling cityscape stood the enigmatic Winchester Mystery House, a sprawling Victorian mansion with a labyrinthine layout that defied architectural logic. My name is Emily Turner, and my lifelong fascination with haunted places led me to this peculiar estate, renowned not just for its architectural oddities but for the dark legends that shrouded its history. Sarah Winchester, the widow of the inventor of the famous Winchester rifle, had embarked on a relentless quest to appease the spirits of those killed by her husband's creation. Her solution? A never-ending construction spree that transformed the mansion into an ever-evolving maze of staircases leading to nowhere, doors opening into solid walls, and rooms that seemed to shift when not being observed. The locals whispered that Sarah was haunted by the restless souls of Winchester victims, their presence etched into the very fabric of the house. I arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the air tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and impending rain. The mansion loomed before me, its ornate facade a blend of Gothic and Victorian elements, windows gleaming despite years of neglect. As I approached, the grand iron gates creaked open, revealing a path overgrown with ivy and framed by towering oaks that cast long shadows across the grounds. Entering the house felt like stepping into another world. The interior was a chaotic blend of unfinished rooms, ornate decor juxtaposed with bare walls, and intricate woodwork that seemed almost alive. My flashlight beam danced across the ceilings, illuminating the bizarre architectural features, arched doorways that led to brick walls, grand staircases that twisted upwards into darkness, and countless doors that opened into thin air. The first night was uneventful, filled with exploration and documentation. I roamed the endless hallways, taking notes and capturing photographs of the house's peculiarities. But as dusk turned to night, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped, and an oppressive silence settled over the mansion, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional groan of the old structure. Around midnight, I began to hear it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling, but the rhythm was too deliberate, too human. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, my flashlight guiding me toward the grand staircase. As I ascended, the footsteps grew louder, interspersed with soft, eerie whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Reaching the top of the stairs, I found myself in a long corridor lined with doors that led to empty rooms. The whispers intensified, forming indistinct words that sent chills down my spine. I pushed open one of the doors, revealing a lavish parlor that appeared untouched by time. The fireplace crackled with an unnatural flame, and a grand piano sat in the corner, its keys moving on their own, playing a haunting melody that filled the room with sorrow. I approached the piano, mesmerized by its ghostly performance. As the last note lingered in the air, the room went silent. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and the temperature plummeted. I spun around, flashlight beam darting through the darkness, but saw nothing, only the shadows dancing on the walls. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent. Remember us. Honor our stories. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. The air thickened, and the presence of restless spirits pressed down on me. Shadows coalesced into vague, human forms, silhouettes of men and women whose eyes glowed with an ethereal light. They moved with a purpose, circling me in a silent dance of anguish and despair. I backed away, my mind racing with fear and disbelief, trying to comprehend the supernatural forces at play. Desperate to escape, I fled the parlor, navigating the maze-like corridors in a frantic search for an exit. The house seemed to resist my efforts, the layout shifting and changing, doors leading to dead ends, staircases looping back on themselves. Every turn brought new apparitions, families huddled together, their faces etched with pain, children crying out for their lost parents, and the omnipresent figure of Sarah Winchester herself, her expression one of eternal sorrow. In a moment of clarity, I remembered the stories of Sarah's relentless construction, her belief that building the mansion would appease the spirits and grant her peace. Determined to honor their memories, I began to speak aloud, recounting their stories, acknowledging their suffering, and promising to remember their lives. My voice wavered, but the act felt necessary, a way to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. As I spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The oppressive weight lifted, and the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air like morning mist. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the sounds of footsteps and whispers receding into silence. The grand piano ceased its haunting melody, and the doors that once led to nowhere opened into welcoming spaces. I found myself standing in the central atrium, the heart of the mansion, where the first construction had begun. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting vibrant colors across the room. The house felt alive with a serene energy, the restless spirits finally finding the peace they had long sought. Exhausted but fulfilled, I left the Winchester Mystery House with a profound sense of connection to its history and the souls that had inhabited its halls. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin veil that separates our world from the supernatural. I knew that the house would continue to stand as a testament to the enduring power of memory and the importance of honoring the past. Years later, the story of my night at the Winchester House became the cornerstone of my book, a narrative that blended historical fact with personal experience. The mansion remains a beacon for those seeking to uncover its mysteries, its eerie beauty and dark history drawing curious souls from far and wide. Visitors still report their own encounters, phantom footsteps, whispers in the night, and glimpses of ghostly apparitions, each adding to the house's legendary status as America's most haunted residence. And sometimes, when the night is still and the moon casts long shadows across the mansion's facade, I can still hear the faint echoes of those who once roamed its halls, their voices a haunting reminder that some stories never truly end. They linger, woven into the very walls of the Winchester Mystery House, waiting to be remembered and honored by those brave enough to listen. Story number 6. Whispers of the Borden House. The sun had just begun its descent behind the dense Massachusetts woods, casting long shadows that danced across the gravel driveway of the Lizzie Borden house. My name is Alex Mitchell, a true crime author with a penchant for delving into the darkest corners of history. The infamous house, once the scene of a gruesome double homicide in 1892, had long been transformed into a quaint bed and breakfast. Locals and tourists alike whispered tales of restless spirits and unexplained phenomena, making it a magnet for both curiosity seekers and believers in the supernatural. I arrived on a chilly October evening, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and impending rain. The house stood stoically, its Victorian architecture both charming and foreboding. The wrought iron gates creaked as I pushed them open, revealing a pathway lined with towering oak trees whose branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy that filtered the fading light into eerie patterns on the ground. As I approached the entrance, the hostess greeted me with a warm yet cautious smile. "Welcome to the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast," she said, her eyes briefly darting toward the darkened windows. "I hope you enjoy your stay." I thanked her and stepped inside, immediately struck by the contrast between the welcoming decor and the underlying sense of unease that permeated the air. The lobby was adorned with antique furnishings, each piece telling its own silent story. I checked into my room on the second floor, a cozy space with a four-poster bed and a view overlooking the sprawling backyard. That night, as the storm clouds gathered and the first drops of rain began to fall, I settled into my room, eager to begin my research. I spread out my notes and began to piece together the events of that fateful day in August 1892. Lizzie Borden had been accused of brutally murdering her father and stepmother with an axe, a crime that had shocked the nation and left an indelible mark on the town of Fall River. As midnight approached, the house seemed to come alive with the sounds of the storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning illuminated the darkened rooms with brief flashes of light. I was deep into my research when I heard it, a faint, sorrowful wail echoing through the halls. My heart skipped a beat as I listened, the sound resembling the cries of a child. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the parlor, where I hoped to find some answers. The room was dimly lit, the fireplace cold and unused. The wailing grew louder, more distinct, yet I saw nothing out of the ordinary. As I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in complete blackness. Panic set in as I fumbled to turn it back on. When the beam finally illuminated the room, I saw it, a ghostly figure standing by the window, its form translucent and shimmering. It was a woman, her dress tattered and her face obscured by shadows. Her eyes met mine, filled with an indescribable sorrow, before she vanished into thin air. Breathing heavily, I tried to steady myself. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light or perhaps my imagination running wild. But as I returned to my desk, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a pungent odor of decay filled the air. The room felt heavy, as if unseen forces were pressing down on me. I decided to leave the parlor, but as I reached for the door, I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. They were slow, deliberate, and unnervingly quiet. I backed away, my mind racing with questions. Who, or what, was in the house with me? The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside the door. A voice, barely a whisper, called my name. "Alex, help us." The sound was ethereal, yet unmistakably human. I mustered my courage and opened the door, only to find the hallway empty. The footsteps had ceased, and the storm outside had intensified, the rain pounding against the windows like frantic drumbeats. Determined to get to the bottom of the haunting, I delved deeper into the house's history. I discovered that Lizzie Borden had moved to Massachusetts after the murders, seeking solace and a fresh start. However, the house where the murders occurred remained a dark spot on her legacy, attracting those who believed she was guilty and others who felt sympathy for her plight. As the night wore on, the haunting intensified. I heard the incessant tapping of an unseen presence, like fingers drumming on the walls. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, disappearing whenever I turned to look directly at them. The piano in the parlor began to play on its own, the melancholic notes filling the house with an eerie melody that resonated with the sorrow of its past inhabitants. I decided to confront the spirit, to communicate and perhaps find some closure. I stood in the center of the room, speaking softly, "I'm here to understand, to help you find peace." The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder this time. "Remember us. Honor our stories." Suddenly, the lights went out, and I was plunged into darkness once more. The room seemed to twist and contort, the walls closing in around me. I could feel the presence of multiple spirits, their anguish and pain enveloping me. The sensation was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to consume me. In a moment of desperation, I reached out my hand, seeking something to anchor me to reality. My fingers brushed against a cold, hard object, a vintage locket lying on the floor. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand. Inside was a faded photograph of a family, their smiles now a stark contrast to the horrors they had endured. As I held the locket, the house began to calm. The oppressive energy lifted, and the sounds of the storm outside seemed to fade away. The spirit's presence became less intense, their sorrow giving way to a sense of relief. The house settled into a peaceful silence, the restless souls finally finding some semblance of closure. I spent the rest of the night documenting my experiences, the locket serving as a tangible connection to the past. As dawn broke, the storm subsided, and the first rays of sunlight pierced through the windows, illuminating the house with a gentle warmth. I felt a profound sense of gratitude and responsibility, knowing that the stories of those who had suffered here needed to be remembered and honored. Driving away from the Lizzie Borden house, I glanced back one last time. The house stood silently, its dark history now intertwined with my own story of courage and compassion. The whispers had ceased, replaced by the peaceful sounds of a new day beginning. Back home, I poured my experiences into my book, sharing the haunting tales of the Lizzie Borden house with the world. The story resonated with readers, those who believed in the supernatural and those who sought understanding beyond the physical realm. The Lizzie Borden house became more than just a setting for a tragic event. It was a symbol of the enduring connection between the living and the dead, and the power of remembrance to heal old wounds. Years later, the Lizzie Borden house remains a focal point for those intrigued by its dark legacy. Visitors still report hearing faint cries and feeling sudden chills, a testament to the unresolved sorrow that lingers within its walls. But thanks to my efforts, the stories of its past inhabitants are no longer forgotten, their voices echoing through time as a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the mysteries that lie beyond. And sometimes, when the night is still and the wind whispers through the trees, I can hear the faint strains of a forgotten melody, a haunting lullaby that serves as a reminder of the lives lost and the peace that can be found through understanding and remembrance. Story number 7. Whispers of the Crooked House. Michigan's forests are a tapestry of shadows and secrets, where the towering pines whisper ancient tales to those who dare to listen. My name is Ethan Reynolds, and my fascination with abandoned places has led me to some of the most haunted locations across the country. But nothing could have prepared me for the eerie allure of the Crooked House in rural Michigan, a place shrouded in mystery and darkness. The Crooked House stood at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by dense woodland that seemed to close in around it. Its architecture was peculiar, with slanted walls and windows that twisted at impossible angles, giving the entire structure a distorted, almost otherworldly appearance. Locals avoided the place, their wary glances and hushed conversations hinting at the sinister history that clung to its decaying facade. I arrived on a crisp October afternoon, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves and impending rain. Armed with my camera, a flashlight, and a notebook, I parked my truck and approached the house with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The iron gates creaked as I pushed them open, revealing a path overgrown with ivy and wildflowers that struggled to reclaim the property. As I walked up the path, the house loomed larger, its crooked lines creating unsettling shadows that danced in the fading light. The windows, though broken and dusty, seemed to watch me with invisible eyes, their glass remnants reflecting the storm clouds gathering above. I reached the front door, its wooden planks warped and swollen from years of neglect, and pushed it open with a hesitant hand. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty scent of decay. The grand foyer was eerily quiet, the only sound being the distant drip of water echoing through the empty halls. My flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing remnants of a once grand interior now succumbing to nature's relentless embrace. Furniture lay scattered, covered in white sheets that billowed like specters in the faint breeze seeping through broken windows. I set up my equipment in what appeared to be the main living area, determined to document any signs of paranormal activity. As night fell, the house seemed to awaken with a life of its own. The temperature dropped sharply, and an oppressive chill settled over the space, making my skin crawl despite the layers of clothing I wore. Around midnight, I began to hear it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps small animals scurrying in the walls. But the footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, stopping and starting as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth. I followed the sound, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing twisted hallways that defied logic. Doors led to walls, and staircases spiraled into the void, pulling me deeper into the heart of the house's madness. The energy here was palpable, an unseen force distorting the very fabric of reality around me. Objects seemed to move on their own, furniture shifting positions when I wasn't looking, and the walls bending in unnatural ways that made the house feel alive and malevolent. As I ventured further, the sounds intensified. The footsteps were now accompanied by faint whispers, their words indistinct but filled with anguish and desperation. I felt a presence watching me, an invisible force pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My heart pounded in my ears as I stumbled into a grand dining room, its long table set for a meal that would never come. In the center of the room stood an antique piano, its keys moving on their own, playing a haunting melody that resonated through the empty space. The music was sorrowful, each note dripping with pain, and I found myself drawn to it despite the fear gnawing at my resolve. As I approached, the room seemed to warp around me, the walls closing in as if the house itself was tightening its grip. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the room plunged into silence. The oppressive energy lifted momentarily, but the sense of being watched intensified. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling the room with a cacophony of ghostly voices. "Leave now. Don't stay. Remember us." Panic surged through me as I tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature plummeted further, frost forming on the edges of the windows and covering the furniture in a delicate, icy sheen. I felt hands reaching out from the darkness, their touch cold and clammy, pulling me back into the depths of the house. Desperate, I remembered the stories I'd heard, tales of the house's original owner, a man named Arthur Whitaker, who had vanished without a trace one stormy night in 1923. Some believed he had been the victim of foul play, others thought the house itself had claimed him. Whatever the truth, it was clear that his restless spirit, along with those of the other unfortunate souls, still lingered within these walls. Summoning every ounce of courage, I began to speak, my voice wavering but determined. "I'm not here to harm you. I just want to understand." The whispers softened, the oppressive energy easing as the spirits seemed to respond to my plea. The temperature began to rise, the frost melting away as a sense of calm washed over the room. The piano keys started to play again, this time a gentle lullaby that filled the space with a peaceful melody. Slowly, the door creaked open, releasing me from the house's grasp. I stumbled out into the night, the storm having passed, leaving the air fresh and still. As I looked back at the crooked house, its twisted lines now seemed almost graceful in the moonlight, the shadows no longer menacing but serene. I left the property with a newfound respect for the restless spirits that called it home. The crooked house had revealed its secrets to me, allowing their stories to be remembered and honored. As I drove away, the memory of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. Years later, the crooked house remains a place of intrigue and fear, drawing those who seek to uncover its dark past and the spirits that dwell within. Visitors still report strange noises, unexplained movements, and the sensation of an unseen presence watching them from the shadows. But thanks to my experience, there's a sense of closure, a hope that the restless souls have finally found peace. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees and the moon casts long shadows across the twisted walls, I can still hear the faint strains of that haunting melody. A gentle reminder that some stories never truly end, they linger, echoing through time, waiting to be remembered and honored by those who dare to listen.